Hello, Robert. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Tiffany, yes, first of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend time with you and your friends and colleagues at the school. My name is Robert Ladd. Oddly enough, my family calls me Tony, my family nickname. I have a 22-year-old son, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and a wife, and we live in Maplewood, New Jersey.
So, where are you originally from, Robert?
Well, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. I moved to New York when I finished law school, and I've been in the New York, New Jersey area ever since.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your parents and
Sure.
their background?
Both of them are from small towns in South Carolina. My father was the first of his siblings to go to college. He went to a small school, university, a historically Black college, where he met my mother called Claflin University. And after that, he went to law school at Howard University in DC. And one of the things that's really interesting about my father is his dream was to go to Clemson to get his medical degree. But at that point in time, universities in the South did not admit African American students. And my father, in fact, was one of the top students in his class. My mother also graduated from the same university and went on to get her master's and teach also. Later on, when he looked to go do his internship and also then his residency, the difficulty is he had to find a place that would be accepting of African American physicians. And my father was not a general practitioner. He was, in fact, he was a general surgeon at a time in which you did not see many Black surgeons, to be quite candid. So I think the thing that's interesting, though, that we all lose sight of, and I think my kids have lost sight of this, and probably maybe all students of this generation have, is the time period is very short. I asked my daughter, who's 11, and in fact, asked my 22-year-old this as well. I said, how long ago do you think it is that Black people had to drink out of a colored water fountain? And they were like, well, I don't know. I went, okay, do you think it was your great grandfather? Yes, yep. Do you think it was your grandfather? Yes. And when I got them to realize those were my parents who a very short period of time ago could not do the things that many of us take for granted, I think they were a little shocked.
Could you share with the group a little bit about your education as little Robert, Tony, and and the significance, just the impact that that had on you, especially growing up in the South? Mhm.
And I went to a really good elementary school. I then went to a middle school called Myers Park Traditional. And then in eighth grade, and those are all public schools. In eighth grade, my parents made a decision to send me to a private school. I did not want to go. I was not excited about going, but it turned out to be the best thing for my, kind of education and candidly growing up and learning study skills and how to better apply myself. My graduating class was 88 students. I was one of two brown people in my entire grade starting in eighth grade. The other guy who was my complexion was a gentleman whose family was from South Africa of Indian descent. And I don't think it had anything to do with ethnicity, but he ended up becoming, and several other people, one of my best friends. And it was a tough experience. Eighth grade, ninth grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. But I got a good education. I will not tell you a lie. I did not enjoy it. I did not enjoy my time there in the least. I never chose to go to a school performance, a dance or prom. I went to other schools. And what's great about my parents is I've always had a very diverse group of friends, all ethnicities, all religions, etc. But I didn't like kind of not having the opportunity to hang out and spend time with kids and friends who looked like me. And I could not do that at my school.
Do you think that they share those same experiences today?
They meaning African American children in private school
Mhm.
now.
Yes.
I think the thing that 2020 has taught us, 2021 may continue to teach us, but I hope not, is the world has not changed very much.
Mhm.
So the problems of my parents, to some extent, are problems that children have today. The
Right.
problems that I had in elementary school are probably not very different than some of the problems kids have today. Now, maybe the nuance of it is different. Maybe some of the words may not be very different, but I hope what is different is how schools and educators and other parents respond when things like that happen. I hope that's different.
Right, right. No, that's an excellent answer. I can definitely say my experience as Willow at Willow has been that, the response is what matters to what the children are feeling in their environment. Was interesting. Let's make a little bit of a pivot because
Sure.
you and I have also talked about Ruby Bridges and how her story is very similar to you as a child in the private school. And also, there are some similarities to brown children in independent or private schools today. And so I really would like to sort of shift gears and talk a little bit about, what that story of Ruby Bridges, what drew you to that story and what it means to you.
Look, it's twofold. I think the first part has less to do with me and more to do with my daughter. She is a really rambunctious, adjusted, confident little girl.
Mhm.
And this was one of the first books that we read together in elementary school. And it was important for me to read this book to her and with her because I wanted her, and I still do this, I wanted her to see representation of little brown girls who look like her. Now, admittedly, Ruby Bridges' journey is very different than Gabriella's, but I wanted her to see what perseverance and strength look like. And so this remains one of her favorite books. Now, oddly enough, I was out of the country for work, but Miss Bridges came to Maplewood and gave a talk, and my wife took my daughter to see it. But she was really excited about going and hearing, and this is the person she talks about often. The other thing I'll tell you that was important to me is let's not also marginalize what this might mean for other little girls. I think you and I were on the phone once talking about this, and this is pre-COVID. And I mentioned that my daughter's really a social little girl, and we have the neighborhood family house. So there were 7 of her little friends here one day, and I said, "How many have you guys know who Ruby Bridges is?" And every single one of those little girls raised their hand, and they looked at me
Yes.
like I was stupid because why would we not know it? That's
Right.
different because when I was a little kid in school, I did not know who she was. And
No.
we talked about what's different now. That's the difference now. And that's not just the little black girl in the class knowing it. That's the little Hispanic girl and little white girls who knew who she is and knew about her journey.
You're exactly right. I remember when we had that conversation, and I remember saying, they all know about
Every single one.
Ruby Bridges. And
Every
I
single one.
remember they started to sort of detail like her story, and I was so impressed. And they had empathy. So it's interesting, we've talked about Ruby Bridges. I share with you how, Ruby Bridges also has an impact on me as I was growing up. And I think also it's more so been more relevant in my journey through corporate America, you know, being the only one and having to fight through that ladder as being the other one and not necessarily it being a fun place. So, again, I think that there's a lot of parallels from education of this story as well as, in your adulthood life. But with that said, I definitely would like you to share with the kids at Willow a couple of excerpts from the book that you hold very dear to your heart.
I do want to say one thing before I do that. You asked me how it resonates with me. And I said it's twofold. One's my daughter, one is me. And it's going to dovetail into the passage I choose and why. For me in elementary school or middle school, excuse me, and having not known who she was then, the reason I have a connection to the story, not just because of my daughter, it's the sense of isolation that Ruby Bridges had through the beginning of her going and integrating the school. Now, what's different is how she responded to it versus how I responded to it. I remember that sense of isolation. I remember feeling by myself. I'm not an introvert, but in school I became an introvert. And only until I established what I can call some true friendships did I start to come out of that. But there were just dramatic cultural differences between myself and my friends in school, not socioeconomic differences,
Right.
cultural differences. When you ask me to read an excerpt and what part resonates for me, oddly enough, it's the very end of the book. It's the afterword. And the afterword, I talked about isolation, is a little girl with her back walking in the distance. Now, if you remember the book, Ruby always was stoic and quiet and prayed for forgiveness for those around her. I was angry, and I stayed angry for a very long time. Um, again, I fully accept I got a great education and have some lasting friendships from that time. But remember, you're talking about a young man, a boy in the midst of middle school and all that change, having to deal with this as well.
Mhm.
So yes, I'll read one of my favorite parts of this. Later that year, and they're talking about the end of the school, near the end of the school year, two white boys joined Ruby at the France Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into the mischief around the house when they could have been in school and learning. The mob became very angry when the first white students went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands. One parent said, "It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for our children's right to go to school and get their education."
Mhm.
So look, for me, that's important because she never asked anybody to join her. She never begged for anybody to join her. She just stoically continued to learn. And eventually, I would like to think common sense and the law prevailed and people began to slowly change their mind.
Mhm.
Um, I think the other part I want to share is this. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons. Now a successful businesswoman, she's created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation. With its focus on education, community, and the future of our nation's children, the foundation is especially dedicated to revitalizing the William Frantz School, which is located in the heart of the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. Ruby is once again stepping to the forefront and embracing an opportunity to make history by contributing to the challenges that our nation is facing and the recovery efforts followed by Hurricane Katrina. But what's important to me about that passage in particular is the perseverance of the little girl who's going on to be happy and have a successful life as an adult and to figure out how she can reach back and help and benefit others. And if you notice, this is not just about benefiting little Black children, this is about benefiting all children and people. So oddly enough, all the great things in this book, for me, the most important part is the afterward.
That story, and for many of the children at Willow, what they may not understand is that, back when our parents went to school and with Ruby Bridges for often so long, Black children were not allowed to go to school with white children. And so they're sitting in class right now with their friends, all shades of white, all shades of Black, where this was not permissible. And she was trailblazing um, monumental event that allows for our kids to sit in the classroom that they're sitting in today. The other piece that, I will bring up was that she was 6. I think she was
Yes, 6 years old.
6 years old, 6. Um, and she would walk in this class while adults would like spit at her and throw things at her and never wavered
Not
from
once.
from her desire to be educated. And so when you talk about perseverance and when you talk about, this virtue of forgiveness and the way that she was able to take that and give back to all, not just for Black little girls, you think about the type of person that she is. Um, and as you said, you and I probably would have carried a lot of anger around,
Mhm.
but she was able to pray for these individuals at 6
Yes,
adults that treated her like she was nothing so that she could get an education. Um, so I thank you for sharing your story. I thank you for reading the book to Willow. Robert has also donated 50 books, Ruby Bridges books, to the Willow School Library. So I thank you for that.
my pleasure, Tiffany. Thank you very much. I look forward
Thank you.
to seeing you post-COVID, and I regret we could not have done this at the school, but that time will come, I'm sure, in the future.
Yes. And thank you for your time.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.